We've got a small cemetery located at the northern end of the site. We want to identify how many individuals are in that cemetery. By that we take off all related deposits above and reveal grave cuts where we can. Some of them, the burials are shallower than others, so some of them we're actually hitting the burial before we hit the grave cut. Once we identify the grave, we clean it up and then we start removing the soil to expose the bone to try and work out whereabouts on the skeleton we are.
My name's Katie Keefe, I'm from York Osteoarchaeology, and we've been invited in to come and help assess the human remains by Northampton Archaeology. Even if we cleaned them up, it would be unlikely that we'd see any disease or anything like that because the surface detail's been lost. So I think what we're probably going to achieve is where we've got complete graves, we could probably roughly estimate stature. What you'd want to do is if you had a complete bone, you could measure the bone, and then you can use certain formula to work out their actual height.
And eventually what the idea is to have them lifted and then they'll be moved and be buried. But at the moment we are just literally trying to find how many individuals we do have. So we've started on one edge and worked our way through to the far edge, left a small area in the middle so we can work around it, and now we're concentrating on the central area to clear that, identify more grave cuts.
So we're going to try and glean as much information as we can before they're lifted, because they're in a very poor state of preservation and the lifting process will probably damage them even more. So while they're still intact, we're trying to get as much information out of them as we can. Height can be quite good as well because it changes through time period. So we can work out people's average height across the group, and then we can compare them to other time periods to see which group they kind of generally fall into, what their average stature is. Things like age and sex and any pathologies that might be evident. Unfortunately they are so poorly preserved that it's very limited what we can tell, but so far they all seem to be Christian standard burials and they all seem to be adults at the moment as well, so we might be in an area of the graveyard that was specifically used for adult burials and children might have been somewhere else. Now lots of these individuals look like their shoulders have rolled up onto their chest, which again would suggest they were wrapped tightly in a shroud. Even though you haven't necessarily got any finds to suggest that, position can help. Also, if you'd had ribs, as the body decays, if the body's held in a shroud, it will keep the actual cage shape, and then the soil will fill into the cage, whereas if they're not wrapped in a shroud, often the ribs kind of sink down to the side and you end up with just like a kind of horseshoe shape of ribs rather than an upstanding cage. The long bones are made up of lamella bone, which is a lot thicker, and they have more of it, so the long bones of the limbs, the legs and the arms, and also the skull's fairly resilient as well, but bones which are more spongy in nature and have more cortical bone in them, like vertebrae and the pelvis, and ribs and things like that, they've been a lot more poorly preserved on this site. They've been destroyed a lot quicker by the acidic soil, I think. It means they didn't have particularly good dental hygiene, but it's often indicative of like a high carbohydrate diet. I mean, calculus, if you had infinite amounts of money, you could analyse the calculus and you'll find all sorts of things in it. You'll find they've been doing a lot of analysis on calculus at York, and they can tell from things that get caught in it. There's DNA of certain diseases, respiratory diseases, that's locked into the calculus. There's often they've been identified certain kind of possible occupations of individuals when there's been like evidence of flax and other things that they think they've been working with cotton. And
so I'm Sophie and I'm here on behalf of York Osteoarchaeology Limited, and I've been looking at the human remains we've been found here at Polesworth. And so far we seem to have 11 discrete burials, all which appear to be aligned east to west, and all in various stages of completeness. So some are more complete than others, but unfortunately they all seem to be pretty poorly preserved. And we haven't been able to make too many inferences about age and sex due to that, particularly sex, because a lot of the pelvises and skulls which we use for the sexing are incomplete or very heavily fragmented, or in some cases aren't present at all, and quite a few of the burials have had later features truncated through them.
So we can take samples for radiocarbon dating, and we can get an idea of what date they were. Other probably more expensive things that can be done are DNA analysis. You can also do isotopic analysis. So isotopes such as carbon and nitrogen will give you an idea of the person's diet, if it was fish heavy or meat heavy, or perhaps even if they were vegetarians. You can also tell what trophic level they were feeding at, so again if they were carnivores or omnivores. Oxygen and strontium can also tell you where they're from as well, because it's an isotope that's to do with the groundwater and the soil on which they farm and they get their food from. So you might be able to tell if everyone was local to here or if there's been some kind of migration in and around the local area. And again, you could also, DNA could tell you all manner of things. It's fascinating. If the collagen is well enough preserved, then we can find out from their DNA what age and sex they are, and even what eye colour they had, and what kind of allergies they would have had as well. So.